Our top story today is the cost of living crisis in the UK as millions of Britons are suffering from the cost of living crisis. The latest inflation rate gives a sense of ease to UK citizens somewhat. The UK inflation rate dropped to 8.7% in April from 10.1% in March, while the inflation rate stands under 10% for the first time since August last year. However, the latest figures released by the Office for National Statistics remain way more than the predicted 8.2% rate. Reports say the drop took place because energy prices are slowing down from extreme hikes witnessed a year ago. Now, this does not mean that the prices are reducing. It only means that the energy prices are rising less quickly. But the key element to all of this is that prices in the UK continue to surge at the fastest rate in nearly 45 years. The figures come after a major U-turn by the IMF forecast, as the Washington-based financial agency said the UK economy is expected to witness growth this year, while adding the British economy will expand 0.4% in 2023. IMF officials say this is mainly because of the falling energy prices, easing concerns over Brexit and fixing the financial stability following recent UK political turmoil. Well, for more on this topic, lots to unpack. We've got Craig Erlam here, a senior market analyst, joining us from Oanda. Great to see you. So on the surface of all of it, the fact that inflation has dropped to 8.7% for the month of April, falling below that crucial 10% for the first time in 8 months, it sounds good, but actually below the surface, we've got food inflation at 19.1%, which is quite depressing. Craig, tell us more.
Yeah, on the one hand, we can be happy about the fact that it's finally heading in the right direction. But food inflation, as you say, fell from 19.2% to 19.1%. So if that's the pace that we're going at, then it's not going to get much easier for households for quite some time. Inflation overall, as you say, did fall quite considerably, but it didn't fall nearly as much as forecasters expected, which is a concerning sign. Didn't fall as fast as the Bank of England expected either. And I think the most worrying component of this was that core inflation, which is ultimately what the central banks are most obsessed with, because that strips out volatile items like energy prices, that actually rose, and it rose by 0.6%. And that was completely unexpected. That was expected to remain unchanged at 6.2%. So when you take all of this into consideration, this was a pretty terrible inflation report, in my view. And I think this shows that there's still a lot of work to be done and there's still a long way to go. And you can see the reflection in the markets. The pound strengthened, interest rate expectations rose. And now the median forecast for interest rates, the peak of interest rates here in the UK is somewhere between 5.25 and 5.5%. So that's basically another full percentage point still to come if markets are to be believed.
You used the word terrible. How much do you think Brexit plays a part in all of this?
I think it plays a compounding effect, and I think that's mostly related to maybe if you could look at the labour market, some areas where we've seen additional tightness as a result of that, but we have seen more net migration from outside of the EU. So I think that any impact that we saw in the early days of Brexit, I think, has probably been somewhat undone since then. So I think it has had a marginal effect on the inflation rate that we've seen so far, but only because it's compounded what we've seen from other external shocks, primarily initially obviously the supply chain issues during the pandemic, and then of course the war in Ukraine. I think the compounding effect of all of these, and that's something that Andrew Bailey and his colleagues at the Bank of England alluded to yesterday. Economies can sustain one shock and it can have transitory effects on inflation, but when you get shock on shock on shock, then it starts to become more ingrained because it just simply lasts longer and people believe that inflation is either here to stay or it's not going away anytime soon. And that starts to feed into spending habits, into wage expectations and negotiations. And that's when things become more ingrained and central banks have to work a lot harder to get it under control.
And before we let you go, you mentioned Andrew Bailey in the central bank there. We are expecting a rise, I believe, of 25 basis points. Is this the right direction to go in? Because obviously that affects people who are on lower incomes and don't have any savings.
The thing we have to contend with here always is what's the biggest cause of worsening livelihoods in the UK and around the world at this point in time? Is it higher interest rates or is it higher inflation? And higher inflation, I think, is undoubtedly worse, not just because it affects everyone now. 20% food inflation, people feel higher energy prices, people feel, and other services prices as well, people feel. But also the fact that it doesn't go away until it's dealt with. It's not just going to go away of its own accord. So you can either deal with it now and try and get inflation back to a more sustainable level, and that means higher interest rates over the short term, or you can see high inflation for a prolonged period of time and then still have to raise interest rates anyway just to deal with it. So there's no point prolonging the pain. We have to accept that this is a very unfortunate sequence of events that needs to be dealt with higher interest rates, at which point we can start to see interest rates cut again and hopefully alleviate those painful measures and reduce the burden on households over the medium to longer term.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much. A long way to go from the sounds of it, though. Craig Erlam, thank you so much indeed for your time from Oanda today.
Thank you.